Donald Trump's foreign policy proposals have been somewhat of a mystery, and his call for the establishment of safe zones in Syria in order to help refugees fleeing war does not provide much clarity. Turkey and Qatar, both supporters of no-fly or buffer zones in Syria, have cautiously welcomed President Trump's call, while Russia has called for Trump to properly study the consequences of such action. The biggest unanswered question remains as to if this is proof that Trump is now reneging on his promise to work with Russia to defeat terrorism in places like Syria. We seek to understand that and a lot more in this debate with me, Waqar Rizvi. Our guests for this debate are author and Middle East expert Dr. Kevin Barrett, who is joining us live from Madison. And we're also joined by political commentator Mr. Jihad Mourikadeh, who is joining us live from Beirut. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Mr. Mourikadeh, I'll start with you. How do you feel about President Trump's call for safe zones, which for now remain undefined in their parameters?
It is like anything Trump says. It's a lot of ideas. It's a lot of talk, but there is no meat on the bone. There is a reality on the ground, which is Russia, which is Turkey, which is Syria, and it is not by asking his defense and CIA, Defense Department and CIA to present him a plan within 30 days that things are going to happen.
Okay, Dr. Barrett, how do you feel about the safe zone?
Well, I can't disagree that much with the other guest yet. Trump is constantly talking out of both sides of his mouth and other parts of his anatomy. We never know whether what he says is something that's actually going to be turned into policy, as now appears to be the case with the wall he plans to build, walling off Mexico, which many of us thought was simply campaign rhetoric. And this idea of safe zones, again, doesn't have very much substance, and it's hard to tell whether this is something that could actually turn into a project or whether it's just sort of more hot air from Trump.
Okay, so Mr. Mourikadeh, you know, when we look at this issue of safe zones, Turkey and Qatar have individually and they've called for no-fly/buffer zones in the past, and they have cautiously, obviously, welcomed this because obviously we don't know the details of these safe zones at this point. Do you think that Trump is in some ways leaning more towards those countries and their approach, if I may call it that, towards Syria?
I don't think so. I mean, one must remember that it was Secretary Hillary Clinton who was the first to call for safe zones and so on. I don't think that Trump is playing to Turkey or is playing to Qatar. And Turkey has been calling for safe zones for a long time. But as I said earlier, the whole equation in Syria has changed tremendously. Russia is calling the shots. Turkey is partially calling the shots. And these are the two guarantors in Syria today, and nothing happens without their agreement. So safe zones or no safe zones, Trump or no Trump, they are the ones calling the shots.
Okay, so Mr. Mourikadeh, let's talk about Russia then, if we can. Russia, and I'm sure you've read this, has reacted to this, saying that President Trump needs to really study the consequences of what may occur here if he continues and goes ahead with these safe zones. Some very basic things come to mind, such as, you know, a possible confrontation between Russia and the United States if Trump goes ahead with the safe zone, if you know, he's meant to defend that safe zone from, for example, Russia or others. Do you think that Trump wants confrontation in Syria?
I would put the question the other way around. I think Russia knows very well that it cannot do its own plan in Syria or in terms of a peaceful settlement in Syria without the help of the United States. So in that sense, Russia does need the help of the United States. Now, how you get from A to B is Russia's call, and it's not the US call. However, somewhere along the road, there'll be some kind of compromise as to what needs to be done to get to a peaceful political settlement in Syria. And this will be in coordination with the United States, of course. Now, for the ideas of President Trump or other people, as I said earlier, it is really Russia and to a certain extent Turkey who are in charge of Syria.
Okay, Mr. Morkadeh, as a first sign, though, is it a good sign, do you think, or a bad sign that the Trump White House has not contacted, for example, Russia about this issue of safe zones, and Russia says that this is a decision that the United States has made on its own. So when you spoke about compromise, for example, this doesn't really bode well for that, does it?
Well, is it a good sign or a bad sign? I would say it is a no sign, which is a no in the sense that it is not a sign at all. It is just President Trump throwing ideas up in the air, and people at this stage not take him seriously at all. I mean, if he wanted the Defense Department to draw plans within 30 days, what the Defense Department is going to do? Confront Russia? So basically, it is a no sign at all, and I do not think the Russians take him seriously. Diplomatically speaking, Turkey and Qatar play along, but it doesn't go further than that.
Okay, Dr. Barrett, I wanted to get your reaction then to that. How do you feel about this issue?
Well, again, if Trump has some kind of serious idea of imposing anything remotely comparable to a so-called no-fly zone in Syria, and he's planning on doing this without working with Russia, he's even crazier than his worst critics suspect. And I certainly hope that's not the case. Of course, with Trump, you never really know. But Trump is surrounded by military people, and the people around him they're not the sort of people who have ever been on the side of unilateral so-called no-fly zones, which are really just euphemisms for bombing and destroying countries, as we saw in Libya, for example. So I don't think that I think what we're getting here is Trump's off-the-cuff kinds of unscripted remarks that reflect his attention deficit disorder, his inability to work with groups of people in diplomatic situations coming from different nations and different outlooks, and to actually listen to anyone. I mean, he has a very large mouth and two very, very small ears, as well as fingers or whatever. So I think that this is one of those signals that it comes from the President of the United States. Everybody in the world thinks they have to take it seriously. But when the President of the United States is Donald Trump, how seriously we take it is really up for debate. I don't see a huge shift in this administration's policy towards Syria, and to the extent that there is a shift, I would have expected it to be one in which essentially they're going to acknowledge that they've lost their war. The Obama administration tried to destabilize Syria and tried to get their regime changed, and they failed, and Trump was critical of this throughout the campaign. So if Trump gets into office and starts throwing around these euphemisms for no-fly zones, I would be shocked if his military actually was willing to try to implement a no-fly zone and get into a shooting war with Russia.
Dr. Barrett, to be fair, Trump as candidate has said that, he didn't want to intervene in other places in the world as much as previous presidents because, again, his motto has always been America first, right? So he's always wanted to concentrate more on domestic policies and not as much on the foreign policies. He hasn't been as clear till now, at least, on those foreign policies, saying he doesn't want to intervene. So does that not then go against what he is now saying in the sense that he wants safe zones? That obviously requires intervention, doesn't it?
Well, that's true if you take him at his word. But there's a huge contradiction between the two Trumps. On the one hand, we have a Trump who says that he's a non-interventionist. He's not interested in nation building. He wants to put America first. He wants to put America back to work. He wants to rebuild American infrastructure and save that money that's been wasted by the two previous administrations on these crazy foreign military adventures and use it for America. And I think that's all well and good. But the problem is that Trump is in contradiction with the other Trump. And the other Trump is the Zionist Trump that's a good friend of Bibi Netanyahu, that's essentially surrendered to Bibi Netanyahu and is surrounded by hardline Zionists, both of the Christian and Jewish persuasions. So the destabilization of Syria really has always been part of the larger Middle Eastern war on behalf of Israel. This was the war that was put into overdrive with the false flag event of September 11th, 2001, whose purpose, as we heard from General Clark, was to destroy or overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. And they're behind schedule on those 7 countries, but that is still the policy of Bibi Netanyahu, Trump's close friend, and the people who are funding Trump. So ultimately, these U.S. misadventures that have destroyed America's reputation in the world and annihilated our economy have all been part of a war on the Middle East for Israel. And Trump is very
Brett,
close
if you allow
to
me, I just
these
want to get
extremist elements in
reaction
Israel
on what you've
that
just
are
said
really the force behind the destruction of Syria.
Mr. Morkada, you've been listening there to Dr. Brett. What are your thoughts?
About specifically?
Well, obviously, when we're talking about the fact that the safe zone will require U.S. military intervention, that's something that as candidate Trump had said he did not want to intervene in other parts of the world, especially militarily.
First of all, I agree with your guest in terms of the two Trumps situation. However, intervening military on the ground without Congress authorization doesn't seem possible or appropriate right now, because so far President Obama has been intervening with special troops which did not really require Congress approval, because he was operating under a very old approval of Congress in the days of President Bush. Now, if President Trump wants to intervene on the ground, he needs Congress approval, and I don't think he will ever get it. Certainly not. The only possibility is for him to get out of the Iran deal, because on this issue he's got support in Congress, but maybe not full support in the Senate.
Okay, so Mr. Morkada, if I may come in here, Mr. Morkada, I do apologize for interrupting you. Do you believe that a safe zone / buffer zone, no-fly zone, whatever we may call it, is needed in Syria?
It was needed, certainly. Whether it is needed today, I don't know, because there are already safe zones in Syria, which is the zone controlled by Turkey, as you mentioned earlier, in Jarablus. Safe zones can be created along the Jordanian border. There is a safe zone under Russian control in Latakia. So there are safe, and of course Damascus is a safe zone. Now, if you want to call Aleppo a safe zone, half of which is destroyed, I don't even know whether it's really a safe zone. But Damascus, Latakia, the north of Syria under Turkey, the Kurdish area, the south of Syria, all of these are existing safe zones de facto. Now, how you want to delimit them, how you want to protect them, is another question that needs to be agreed with Russia.
Okay, Dr. Brett, how do you feel about the need for safe zones?
Well, this is one of the few Press TV debates where I can't find very much to fight about with the other guest. I think that this notion that safe zones are even really an issue now is kind of bizarre, especially coming from Donald Trump. There was a real debate in American policy circles a few years ago about whether there should be a quote-unquote no-fly zone, especially before Russia got involved. That's when it was theoretically possible. But today, Russia is there. They have very robust anti-aircraft systems, and Russia is not going to let happen to Syria what happened to Libya. That's all pretty much over and done with. That issue has been settled. So as far as making people safe in Syria, that's a wonderful idea, and the United States can work with Russia, with Syria, with Iran, with Turkey, and other players to try to make that possible. But any kind of unilateral American attempt to impose the equivalent of no-fly zones over parts of Syria today is really a day late and a dollar short. So I think this is probably another of these off-the-cuff remarks that Trump loves to throw out that don't have a whole lot of policy substance behind them, and I hope that's the case.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll leave it there at that point, but of course we do appreciate both of your contributions to this edition of the debate. That was author and Middle East expert Dr. Kevin Barrett, who was speaking to us live from Madison, and we were also joined by political commentator Mr. Jihad Morakadeh, who was speaking to us live from Beirut. And of course, viewers, we appreciate you joining us as well. Until next time, good night.